Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Maury Peiperl, Dean of George Mason University School of Business, to discuss why the IMF's push for lower corporate tax rates is dangerous. Maury, it's great to meet with you. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thanks, Jill. Nice to be here.
And Maury, what is the fundamental cause of the massively increasing wealth disparity and inability for countries to invest in basic infrastructure?
Yeah, I think there are a couple. Certainly unfettered individualism, right? I mean, it's natural, but if it's not at least regulated a bit, you run into trouble. Relative lack of interest in the public good and the future of societies and nations, rather than building one successful business, which is a big thing. And I would also add a distrust of government, right? But fundamentally, at some level, government has to be us. So, and then maybe taking infrastructure for granted, right? If you've always had it, then it's not something you worry about, and then it gradually starts to go away, and before you know it, it's too late. And maybe also for some of those countries that do have a more balanced system, they have a memory, more recent memory of war or disasters at home that really threaten lives and infrastructure, but not all countries have that recent memory.
Why is the push for lower corporate tax rates dangerous?
Well, I think what's become clear is it enriches the few and it lowers the funds to develop the society. And it's not about good people, bad people. It's simply about structurally what seems to work to build the future. I think pushing lower and lower corporate tax rates promotes a race to the bottom globally for tax rates, and really exports the trend of enriching the few and not having the funds to develop.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen called for a global minimum tax rate. Would that be effective?
Well, I think it would if enough countries signed up to it and stuck to it. That's always the question, right? It's far easier to do what's right if your colleagues and competitors have to do it as well, particularly if it's going to cost you something to do it. But I think it could work, I have to say.
So what kind of tax policies are likely to spur development?
Well, first of all, I don't want to say high corporate tax rates, but higher and relatively normalized across the developed world tax rates. Sorry, developed world may not be the right phrase, but the wealthier countries. Consumption taxes seem to work. Taxes on gasoline, on carbon, on luxury goods, things like that have worked, I think, in a number of places. And then a global consortium agreement to regularize these things. You really need to have some fundamentals that are common across the global trading system for this to work. I would advocate eliminating subsidies for things that you want to move away from. Fossil fuels, for example, they had their day. I don't think they belong in a structural effort to build the future. I also think much higher taxes at the top end of the income spectrum. I mean, why? How else are you going to reduce the extreme income and wealth inequality? It has gotten so much worse in the last 10, 20, even 30 years. It just keeps going in the wrong direction. And I think at some point, the society has to claw some of that back, not because you want to do ill to people, but because you want to level a bit the playing field, even out the system, so that nations can do good work for the future of their country. And credits for those on lower incomes, like, for example, those with children, as is currently being proposed in the U.S. And so you then get funds, and if the tax policies work well, you use those funds for the common good, right? For support for infrastructure, public transport in particular, early childhood education, funding, which we're going to have to figure out in the U.S. some way to do, Social Security and Medicare, because you can sort of see the clock ticking on those things. Higher education, of course, I'm a little biased here, being in the industry, but loan forgiveness or mitigation, so that you can make it more accessible and not have people in permanent debt. And incentives like credits for investment in renewable energy or in health, et cetera.
Well, Maury, of course, the problem is we all know that these things need to be addressed. Where is there ever going to be a middle ground? As you had mentioned before, we're polarized on just about every issue. Realistically, can we start to chip away at these things? Because it doesn't seem to be that we're going in that direction just yet.
Oh, I think so. I think the polarization is a bit overstated, and I must say also kind of goaded on by lots of different forces. I think most people are in some middle ground on most issues. I think the world has gradually been getting better. Also, if you look at sort of overall numbers of children who make it to 1 year old, 5 years old around the world, who can read, et cetera, there's a whole kind of global middle class which is growing, emerging, and wants to engage, wants to contribute. It's not just sort of saying, come and help us out. It's engage us in a system that works for the biggest number. So I think it will require a global infrastructure to enforce the agreements and prevent a rogue behavior to make this happen. It'll provoke some fights, but that is normal. It is part and parcel of certainly democratic society to say we kind of work together, we figure it out, we negotiate, but you need to be able to do that in your own country if you're going to be able to do it at a global level. And this has happened. We have the experience of making this happen, but also calling out, those businesses who decide to keep going for the very few tax havens. There are countries at 25% corporate tax, which is sort of normal, some at 35 and 40, but there are a handful at 0. And if you are at 0, then you are intentionally trying to kind of take business away from the whole rest of the world. And so we have to be able to call them out. If you can't call out those domains, you can call out the companies. And the idea I think that's most potentially impactful here is if investors, and particular large funds, also refuse to support that kind of behavior, as they're starting to do in corporate social responsibility and sustainability funds. We're starting to see more and more of it. So I think we can start to firm up the change that seems to be happening when we talk about what's the role of business in society. It's not about getting rid of it. It's not getting rid of free enterprise. It's about making sure that the right regulations are in place, that the disparities are brought closer together rather than allowed to get further apart. And this, I'm afraid, is a middle ground thing. It is about working it through. It is about assuming that most people want the longer term good for most people. I believe that there's plenty of examples where it's been working for decades, not only Western Europe, Canada, Japan, Australia, Chile, for example, who are now rewriting their constitution to be a bit more kind of inclusive. So I think it can work. I think it's a matter of bringing enough people together over enough specifics to make the progress that we need.
Yep, let's hope that we can get some of that progress. Maury, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
My pleasure, Jill. Thank you.